All right, we are going to go ahead and get started for today. If you are logged on for the webinar, we welcome you here today. The Franklin Leadership Series today is presenting Preparing for a Career Abroad. We would recommend if you are logged on as a viewer that you change your view to active speaker view. So that will allow you to be seeing the speaker in the main panel. And we would ask that you would keep yourself on mute. We will have time for questions, and we will ask you to put those questions in the chat as we go through, and then we'll cover those questions at the end. But again, we want to welcome you to this series today. The first thing I want to do is introduce Cleo Franklin. Cleo is one of our alumni. He graduated from Morningside College in 1981 and currently serves on the Morningside College Board of Directors. He is passionate about providing opportunities and resources to inspire and support the next generation of leaders. He is the founder of the Morningside College Franklin Leadership Foundation, author of the leadership book Coffee with Cleo, and the founder, president, and CEO of Franklin Strategic Solutions, a global consultant and leadership development business specializing in global strategic planning, marketing, business development, organizational development, brand strategy, executive coaching, and keynote speaking for all industries. So welcome, Cleo.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm really excited about today's webinar, and I want to just share with you a couple of things very quickly before we get into the exciting panel that we have before you today. The Franklin Leadership Foundation is all about creating future leaders today. And how we do that is by providing you an engagement platform that really helps not just from your career and professional development, but it also let's siege your progress towards the future. We're learning from the best experts across the world, across different industries and categories. And that's what we have today as we talk about preparing for a career abroad. A very quick story. My dad was a Korean War veteran, and he rarely talked about his experience at war, but he did talk about his time in Korea and also in Japan. And what I marveled at back then was how much he knew about the culture, how much he knew about the nuances and the dynamics of the Japanese and Korean culture. Little did I know that I had an opportunity to travel abroad when I was running the parts business for John Deere and the commercial and consumer equipment division. We traveled over to 6 different countries, and I had never traveled abroad before. But what I did before going abroad was that I researched each specific country and area that we were going to present. In addition to that, I wanted to find out something very obscure, something that was great affinity within the segment that I was speaking to. But I also did a portion of that presentation in a native language. Let me tell you, when I was done after this trip, not only were we able to achieve our objective, but it provided great learnings. It also gave us the ability to connect each of those different countries at a level beyond what I ever imagined. And so what did that teach me? It taught me that you really need to understand not just your customers, but your countries that you're traveling to, that you're going to do business in, or the jobs that you're seeking. And so how does that tie into today? You're going to speak to an expert group of panelists, and they have worked abroad in many different places across the globe. And they're going to get into that. And they're going to leave you with a lot of insight. So with no further ado, I like to say bom dia, obrigada to Patricia Dyar. I like to say buenos dias, muchas gracias to Steve Smith. And I have to say e kozanos in Hungarian to Dr. Magan Lewis. With no further ado, I'll give it to Stacey.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. You know, at Morningside College, we pride ourselves on active learning, and these experts are going to be able to come through with that today because they have all experienced working abroad. So we're very excited for you guys to meet our panel. We're going to let each of them introduce themselves, and then we're going to go on to a couple of pre-programmed questions, and then we're going to open it up for any additional questions that any of our viewers might have. So first up is Stephen Smith.
Good morning, everybody. I'd just like to tell you a little bit about my background, but as Cleo mentioned, living abroad and working abroad certainly opens up and broadens your experiences as you have a career in an international business. My family was fortunate enough to actually move to Mexico when I was a teenager, right out of high school, and we relocated to Mexico, and I ended up going to college. I'm a graduate of Monterrey Tech University in Monterrey, Mexico. Learned the language, met my beautiful bride who's been married for now 40 years. and ended up with the experience of having lived in Mexico and being bilingual, began my career in international business. And I spent 25 years with CNH Corporation, a little over half of that with Latin America region, and the rest in North America. But I began my career almost 40 years ago with a small hay equipment company out of Heston, Kansas, as a service technician traveling anywhere from Mexico to Buenos Aires, Argentina. So it's certainly opened me up to many different cultures. So I hope to give you a little bit of that information today as we go forward. Thank you, Stacy.
Excellent. Our next panelist is Patricia Dyar. Patricia.
Yes. Hello, everyone. And a little bit different than Steve's experience. I grew up on a small farm in Northeast Iowa and really didn't get my first opportunity to work abroad until I'd been with John Deere 22 years. So lived and raised on a family farm that my parents still live on. And my first opportunity to leave to go to Brazil to lead the bank for John Deere in Brazil was 22 years later. And my husband and I had an opportunity to live and work in Brazil for 2 years, from 2011 to 2013. And so a little bit of what I'll touch on today is just my background as well, having the opportunity to just retire from Deere after a 30-year career there, doing a number of different things, as it says on the slide, number of different roles that really became foundational for me to have the opportunity to lead the bank in Brazil. Experiences that were in operations, sales, marketing, and touched on several different industries for Deere, which would have been the ag industry as well as the construction and forestry industry. And I took those things to Brazil when I led the bank there in 2011. So thanks, Stacy. Back to you.
Excellent. And our last panelist for today, Dr. Megan Lewis.
Hi. Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here today, and I'm very interactive. So to kick it off in the chat, give me one word of why you are excited to hear from all the panelists today. So while you're chatting, I'll give my introduction. I am currently serving as the Integrated Field Sciences Global Field Innovation Lead. So what does that mean, right? Let's break it down. I drive the development, validation, deployment, and adoption of digital agriculture tools across the globe. I get to interact with tons of individuals from Latin America, North America, Asia Pacific, Europe, and it's ever-changing, it's fast-paced. I grew up in a small town in North Dakota. Both parents were teachers. As you are all navigating your journey of what you want to be when you grow up, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, almost 10 years in industry. But when I kicked off college, I actually triple majored in opera performance, piano composition, and science. And I decided to take science through master's, PhD, so plant breeding and genetics is my background. I've held multiple scientific roles in industry, 7 relocations in 9 years. And what I can tell you is that I am a scientist, but I love people leadership. And having that people leadership background is what allowed my family and I to move over to Hungary and lead research and commercial across Europe. So truly grateful. I'm excited to share insights with all of you today. I'm a scientist, I'm a mom. I'm also a huge STEM influencer and advocate, and ask away. I also love calling on people. So please utilize the chat and let's keep the discussion going. So thank you.
That is great. So that is our panel of experts. We do have a couple of pre-programmed questions, so we're going to start to bring those up. The first question, please discuss the skills that one acquires by working overseas and why it would be beneficial in any industry. So Megan, why don't we go ahead and start with you tackling that one?
Yeah, no, happy to do so. I'm going to start with a personal story to kick it off. And I remember the day vividly. My family and I were currently located in South Dakota, and the leadership team came to me and said, Megan, we have this amazing opportunity for you to move overseas. Remember, I grew up in a small town in North Dakota, and I was just comfortable with the Midwest. And so this was a huge leap for me. But I embraced the challenge, and I packed up my entire family, babies and all, and we moved over to Hungary, and we dove right in. And so some of the key skill sets that really stand out to me are resilience and flexibility, being able to pivot, being able to navigate the unknown, and actually being okay with being uncomfortable. I remember just the travel alone to get to Hungary that day as we're beginning our journey. Everybody on Facebook and social media, they will post this amazing picture that everything is happy, they're excited, they're embracing life. But I'm gonna be a realist. When we first arrived to Hungary, I wasn't smiling and cheering. I actually just broke down in tears. And I remember it because I said, what are we doing? You know, we just moved our family across over and we're away from my family, my husband's family, everybody's family. And what happened is my husband went down to the grocery store and one of the owners knew that we were probably struggling a little bit and gave my husband a box of Kleenex. And the Kleenex said, home is where the family is. And he set that on our dining room table near Budapest, Hungary. And I remember it so vividly because that's absolutely right. So by us taking that chance and embracing change and diving into new cultures for not just professional, but personal reasons, it was one of the greatest experiences of our lives. And so it taught me to persevere. It taught me to pick myself back up. And it taught me to just dive in and learn something new, be a continuous learner and green and growing. And so just to recap, resiliency, flexibility, have to always continually learn and be ready to solve problems that you never thought you'd have to solve. So having that solution mindset is also going to take you far. And my final one, and I'll let the other panelists jump in, is networking. Networking is so critical, not being afraid to reach out, to knock on a new door, to knock on any door and say, hi, this is who I am. And I'm so passionate about what you're doing. I want to learn more. So I think that you're the driver of your career, you're the driver of your destiny, and just embrace challenges, embrace the journey, because I know I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't jump on the adventures that got thrown my way.
That's excellent. Thank you, Megan. Steve, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Yes, one of the things I think I would say is that one of the skills that one develops or acquires working overseas is that it broadens so much your work experience. Many of the companies that are overseas tend to be smaller organizations, and they function by teamwork, and they function by many people being cross-functional. One of my experiences was when I was hired as sales manager for Case Mexico many years ago. Not only was I the sales manager and worked in dealer development, I worked in sales finance, locating banks that were willing to work and partner with our company to provide retail financing, which was new to the market at that time. I worked in product development and in bringing in new products to the country, deciding what products we would actually offer, how we would offer them, what options we had with them. I worked in parts and after sales. So you end up many times working on a team where you have to develop your teamwork skills, but also in cross-functional. And I brought a lot of those skills back to the U.S. with me when I came back and transferred into the North American market and ended up being the North American marketing manager for hay tools and then in territory sales after that. So it definitely gives you the ability to function and think quickly on your feet.
Excellent. Patricia, anything to close this question?
Yeah, so I think, Megan touched on resiliency. That certainly was going to be something that I was going to also touch on. But I think, and probably Steve and Megan, you'd all agree that just even developing your own emotional intelligence as you go through this experience, because one of the things that's easy to do is to bring your US-centric expectations. And what happens is when you do that, what goes on around you is not what you're expecting. And so you absolutely have to be resilient. And as Megan talked about, you have to pivot. And really what you do is you reflect upon yourself and you really realize how important the team is around you, because it's the team of folks that are working for you that are really going to help you navigate some of the difficulties in the country, because certainly they are the natives, they understand the culture, the language, etc. And similar to really what Cleo touched on, I also had to lead a conversation that was in English, but there were two presentations, one in Spanish and Portuguese. I was attending Region 3, which for John, attending a Region 3 leadership meeting. And I was navigating in English, why my presentation was in Spanish and Portuguese, and there were translators. To then develop is trust for your team. And certainly, as you navigate some of those things, you become a little more, again, like I said, emotional intelligent around the environment you're operating in. And certainly you have to pause and continue to ask questions, because when you don't get the answer that you were expecting, then you need to continue to probe further to further uncover potentially some of the biases certainly I was bringing, just because I was coming from a 22-year US experiences and different roles at John Deere. So those are the things that I'd also add on, is that you really need to take a pause, and you're just going to come across things that you weren't expecting. The one other thing I would tell you is, in addition, is just the ability to adapt, because where you might see it as being chaotic, things like just going to the airport and the fact that your gate changes 5 times before you get on an airplane in the country, just realize that's the environment that the folks that are native to the country are used to. They don't see it as being chaotic. They just adapt, and they adapt quickly. So I would say those are a couple of things that I'd add.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to the next question. Just a reminder, we have a couple pre-programmed questions, and then we're going to open it up from the questions that are in the chat. So any questions that you have in the meantime, go ahead and put those in the chat. Second question, what is the skill set or specific personal characteristics that would position someone to work successfully overseas? And this time we're going to start with Stephen.
Okay. Well, we can always speak to the obvious ones. Obviously, first would be language. If you're looking to work in an overseas market with a different language, having that ability to begin with is huge, so that it doesn't slow you down once you move into your new position. Even if you don't speak the language, many times and almost always, it's very well received by the local population. That if you attempt to speak the language, if you take courses, if you take online courses or lit courses or whatever, to improve your language skills, to be able to communicate more effectively, it is always well received by people from the culture you're visiting. The culture is also knowledge of the culture, the environment that you're going to be working in, not only the interpersonal relationships, but also how that culture applies to governmental influences, business influences. Many in Latin America, the relationship is key to building your business. It's very relationship driven, and many times you will not succeed unless you adapt to the local culture and how they want to do business. It's not possible anymore just to come in with a preset mindset and say, this is the way we're going to do it because that's what I've done before. You have to adapt yourself to the local culture. Job experience, whether it's direct experience from work or experience that you've acquired growing up. I grew up on a ranch, and we worked in a lot of hay equipment when I grew up. And my first job out of college was working with a hay and forage equipment manufacturer out of Heston, Kansas. And they primarily hired me not only because of my language, but because I did have those years of experience of sitting on a tractor baling hay and working with hay equipment and direct knowledge of the industry and the type of equipment that they were looking. And they hired me as a service rep because of that.
Excellent. Patricia, anything you want to add to this question?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with Steve on learning the language. The smallest things that you can do really help you assimilate, and it becomes a thing of acceptability as well, where people accept that you're trying. And my husband and I, we've been married almost 40 years. We have 2 kids. Our children now, though, are 37 and 32. So neither one of them went with us on our overseas experience. Our daughter had already graduated college and was in her career, and our son was finishing up at college. We went untethered, if you will. So there are certain things as you go overseas that we as a family didn't have to deal with because we didn't have little kids like Megan would have had along. But so the things that specifically I think are personal characteristics are you're always learning. So if you're someone who enjoys structure and things that are pretty black and white, this will be a definite challenge for you to go to an overseas assignment because it is very unstructured, and things are not necessarily as black and white. The other thing I'd say is specifically in my case, because I had started a career with John Deere Financial in Des Moines, Iowa, uh, many opportunities happened here because we were expanding from a company of 200 when I started to now we have 2,500 employees all over the world. So a lot of the positions that I have found overseas didn't need to, wasn't required of experiences in accounting and financials, marketing, sales, and as I mentioned previously, both in the ag and construction sectors. One of the things that I was responsible for when I first got to Brazil was the company had made the decision to relocate the bank from the southernmost state and move it 800 miles north and west. And that's a significant thing for Latin American culture because in many cases, these folks have not left where they grew up. And in some cases, they're still living with their parents as 30-year-old adults. So this was a significant decision for certainly the employees for John Deere and the bank to relocate. And the other thing that we did at the same time was our construction business was opening new operations in Brazil, and we're locating in the city that we relocated the bank to. And so that was something brand new for the bank to also learn how to finance and underwrite construction business, where it predominantly had been an agricultural lending group up to that point. So that we had to go to the market to hire that kind of expertise and so forth. So there's just a lot of things as you start to kind of get into your work experience overseas, that having had some of the prior foundational experiences that I had, certainly as an individual contributor, but then more so as a manager of managers, a people leader, that really led to a very successful experience for my husband and myself. But again, the big thing is certainly learning some of the language, and that will certainly go a long ways to adapting to the cultural changes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Megan, anything to close out this question?
Yeah, no, definitely. The other panelists covered it spot on. So great job, Patricia and Steve. I think that the one thing I just want to emphasize is passion and care. And that continuous learner is so huge. And the other thing that I would add would be a listener. I'm an extrovert. I love to chat. I love to talk. And one of the big skill sets that I just really had to boil down was listening and seeking to understand. We were told that we were headed overseas and we had about 3 weeks to prep before moving overseas and packing our life up in suitcases. And so that's not nearly enough time to learn the entire Hungarian language. But what I can say is that the panelists covered it spot on, showing that you care and showing that you have the passion to learn. And that not only gains trust, that just gains team momentum, and they want to back you and support you and be here with you and be successful in the field, in the lab, in the office. And so those skill sets are really critical. One way that I jumped on that was I came in as a people leader of scientists, of amazing individuals across the board with over 10 languages present at the one station that I was in charge of. And I made it an effort to develop a safety video in Hungarian and in all the other languages that were present at the station to show that, we're in it together, and I wanted to learn and dive into it. And my Hungarian was really rough. I had people laughing on the floor, and it got way better towards the end. But Mel said that my 3-year-old could speak Hungarian better than me. And I absolutely agree. I have my 3-year-old ordering food off menus for me as we sat and we ate out at restaurants. And so it definitely was a great experience. But then I'd also say be a go-getter. And when I mean go-getter is not being afraid to jump out of your comfort zone. The other panelists covered it exactly right, not black and white, but living in that gray space. And as the one panelist mentioned, it may be chaotic to some that is normal, and embracing that and being flexible, adaptable, but definitely just having that care and passion and just listening and diving in and wanting to understand, and that's where you're going to grow. That's where you're going to pick up those skill sets that are going to be so critical as you advance in your journey of your career or just personal and professional development.
Hey, Stacy.
Yes, Cleo.
Stacy, yeah, I just wanted to, I think that's a great question, and everybody is giving good insights to the question about a skill set or a personal characteristic. I just wanted to add a couple things. I think it's important when you're going overseas, whether you're traveling or work abroad or seeking a career. I think you need to, one skill set is to maintain a great sense of curiosity. You also have to lose your presumption.
Mhm.
And I do believe in adapting a good dose of humility. Just because of the fact that, Mexico, Indiana, and Mexico, Missouri have the same name. I've been to both places. They are very, very different. And so understanding the fact that what is applicable in Honduras may not be applicable in Mexico. Steve can tell you in the different states in Mexico, things are different. Brazil is different than Argentina. We can go on, but taking that way, getting rid of that presumption, maintaining a good level of curiosity to truly seek and to understand, I think will set anyone very well to be successful before they pursue any opportunities abroad or overseas.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Our next question, how did you go about finding your job overseas? And I think some of this was covered in the introduction, certainly, but if you just want to talk a little bit about that process. And this time we're going to start with Patricia.
Yeah, so for me, as I mentioned, when I started with John Deere Financial, John Deere Financial was only in 2 countries. It was US and Canada. And then as Deere started to expand its manufacturing footprint, we started to also go abroad. First we went to Mexico, then we went to Europe. And then in 2000 and well, it was after the financial crisis of 2008, Deere took a look at its strategic intentions on a global basis and knew that they wanted to have operations in the BRIC countries. And so that took them on to navigate going to Brazil, Russia, India, and China and open factories there. There certainly were, Deere did have presence in some of those countries before we went on that geographic expansion in 2010 and 11 and 13, 12. But this was a broader manufacturing footprint. And what that then brought an opportunity for John Deere Financial to also expand where there wasn't a competitive local lender. It took the opportunity to say, let's expand John Deere Financial on a global basis as well. So really the opportunities to have an international assignment, starts with having a global company. So a company that has a global footprint, that helped. And the other thing was us taking a strategic decision to grow in those countries. The other thing I would tell you is what was beneficial for me was not only the diversity of the experiences that I had within John Deere Financial, again, going across functional areas such as accounting and finance, sales, marketing, but also I was someone who had performed at a high level in the positions I held at the time. So in other words, saying I was focused on the job and doing an exceptional job in the job I had. Yes, I had mentors that I approached, and we talked about what are the global opportunities within the company. And so that then led me to conversations then with my husband, because I knew we wouldn't go international if I didn't have the support of your spouse. And that's absolutely critical, is to have a partner that can be there for you as you start to kind of grow your experience. My husband left a career. He'd been in several different city and state roles in Iowa. And so he was having to leave his almost 30-year career in the IPERS retirement system to follow me to Brazil. But I would tell you that he enjoyed that experience so much. He was the day-to-day going to the grocery store, taking care of our banking, all those things, because that's all in the local language. It's not in English, it's in Portuguese. And so he was the trooper that really, to tell you the truth, he did much better at the day-to-day speaking the language than I got to where I could understand it well and read it well. But, I pretty much spoke in the present tense continuously, where my husband understood a lot of those different dynamics. So, but again, I would tell you, you want a global company, certainly look at performing at a high level in the current role that you have, and then seek mentors that will help you navigate what the international opportunities are and what are some of those building block roles that you could look to before you expand into an overseas assignment.
Excellent. Megan, you're up next.
Yeah, no, a lot of great points covered and similar notes that I had. So thank you, Patricia, for kicking us off. I guess my motto is always make every interaction count, because every interaction matters and is a gift. And so I'm going to walk the audience through just undergrad, graduate school, and work, maybe to tap some additional members that are on the call today. And so think about my undergraduate experience, again, small town, North Dakota. I saw and I met amazing people. And I was always heavy in agriculture research. So I worked in many labs in the field, et cetera. And what that meant is I was able to get exposed to diversity all around in education, experience, cultures. And one of my best friends ended up being from Brazil. And so what I'm trying to say is that make every interaction count and not be afraid to network. So not only in those situations, tell your professors, tell your advisor, give your interest. If you are really passionate about diving into something new, don't be afraid, seize the opportunity. Going into graduate school, I then heightened that. Now, one of my good friends today, she's from Colombia. And so just being afraid to dive into new cultures, meet new people, and again, seize the moment. So networking, all in all, I think is really, really critical if you're just looking to study abroad. But then also one thing I would do is, if you come across an influencer or if you come across somebody on LinkedIn or social media that just really catches your attention, send an email, send a message and say, hey, I'm interested in learning about you and how you got to where you are. Because sometimes those interactions, you get that aha moment of, I could do that. I'm in the same spot. This could help me in some capacity. And so just being bold on that front, I think could be really critical. Now, for the work piece, Patricia covered it perfectly. It's really about doing your job that you're assigned to do really, really well. And also in my situation, I love giving it 120%. I'm really driven individual when it comes to leadership and science. And what I did is I did my current job super, super well. And I notified my supervisors and all of my mentors and said that, yes, I'm ready to grow. I'm ready to make a difference. I'm ready for something else. So just being vocal and building your brand. And this is what I would say for finding a job is build your brand. What is your elevator speech? What are you going to tell me in 1 minute that's just going to wow me as a stranger in an elevator saying, I want to work with that individual? And refining that elevator brand speech, I think would go super far as well in today's world, just to help with the social interaction as well. So build your brand, be bold, and network. And mentorship is so important. What I can tell you on the mentorship front is that I mentor 25 individuals today across the globe, in Corteva, outside of Corteva. I also have 10 mentors and mentors in Corteva and outside. And I purposely identify people in the finance space to keep me honest. So I keep that family pillar visible and don't get lost into the day-to-day job. So find mentors, switch up your mentors. They don't have to be the same every year. I honestly change mine every year just to refresh, to make sure that I'm growing and developing. And so be bold. I look forward to hearing your statement of your brand, and also just have fun. Don't forget to have fun. This is a great time to dive in.
Perfect. Stephen, anything to finish this question up?
Well, I don't know what else to add after all of that. They've done very well. The one thing I think I could add to this would be you also need to be adaptive. Things don't always turn out exactly the way we planned them in the beginning. I shared the story a few moments ago about, my first job out of college was working with a hay and forage company, and I grew up ranching and had that experience with hay and forage equipment. and that helped me get that first position. But after a few years, I got out of that business and worked in some other fields for a while. Then decided I wanted to get back into international business and started looking around in the community that I was in. And I began my career with C&H, Case New Holland. And they had a local dealership that was a corporate-owned store. And I went there to find out about how to apply or how to find the human resources department for international division with that company. And at the time, they weren't looking for anybody in that position. And I could have taken that at face value at that moment and gone on looking in another direction. But I asked about working with the local dealership, and they said that they had positions open in retail sales. I took a position, began working for the corporation, and within a year and a half, a position opened up in Mexico in the international sales division. And I took that job and got back into the market and spent the next 12 years working for Case New Holland in Mexico. So you have to be adaptive. You have to be able to take what's offered and see how you can mold that and push that in the direction you want to go. I think in some of the notes that I left earlier, I said, you need to aim high, but you need to be willing to put in the work to acquire that position. And sometimes that means taking a position and working for a number of years. As Patricia said, she spent a long career in North America before the opening came up for Mexico and Brazil. So you have to be able to put in the work to be able to attain those type of positions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Next question. Are there differences in the hiring process? Should you focus on certain things in your resume or your application materials? And we're going to go back to Megan for this one.
Yeah, that's a great one. I just want to tap on, I just had an aha moment after Steve was talking that also had me thinking of something that I learned early on in my career that was super helpful, is that when you think about career progression, when you join corporate America or a new organization, you always think of it going up. You think of, ladder climbing, or the words that they say that, the next promotion, the next promotion. One thing that I learned on early in my career is that those lateral moves that are just as critical as those moves that take you to the next level. And so if I could add to that last question too, I would say, don't have a career that just goes like this. Have a career that zigzags all the way around, because you're just going to grow and be better. And so I just wanted to add my zigzagging comment because Steve inspired me. He had that aha moment click as he was chatting. So I just wanted to say that you don't have to always look straight up, but it could zigzag and be different, and that's okay. And that's actually better. So, okay, are there differences in the hiring process? So just to clarify for this question, the hiring process in the country that I was located, correct?
Jim?
Yes, that would be fine.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I mean, that was one of those areas, and the key aha moments that I had right away was moving from the US over to Hungary, just something as simple as salary bands or how salaries are determined or how individuals receive a paycheck was way different and done by like country managers rather than just working with your local HR in the United States. So that part was really different. For the hiring process, and just based on experience, I'm sure Patricia and Steve could touch on this one way further than I didn't actually hire when I was overseas. I was brought in to lead a team and to lead people, but we didn't have any hiring processes during the time that I was over there. But what I can say is that for the contract workers that came in for that country that we looked at, things on the application, if we were to look at somebody outside of Hungary or somebody who wants to dive into a scientist role, areas and the key terminologies that we were diving for, we did look at language to see if they spoke multiple languages, but we also looked at experience. And hear me out. When I say experience, I don't just mean the same type of activities every single time. Candidates that stood out for the contract positions or internships or scientist ideas were those candidates that had diversity experience. And so, maybe they worked in a certain crop or a certain field, and then they also had lab experience. They also had greenhouse experience, and it varies into whatever profession you're in. But to have an open mind, continuous learning mindset, I think is really critical. And diversity of experience, not being afraid to get internships that maybe challenge you and make you think outside the box, but internships that are going to make you stronger and who you are today.
Perfect. Stephen, anything you want to talk to in regards to this question?
Certainly, certainly. Differences in the hiring process. I think we can start with focusing on whether you're entering an expat system and actually going to live in country for a number of years, or whether you're working with a company and traveling from, say, Piston, Kansas, or Racine, Wisconsin, to another country on an informal basis, and you're traveling back and forth. The position that I have now that I hold, I live in Houston area, and I travel to Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. But so you have to understand where in the spectrum you sit, and whether what will then apply to how you go about getting the hiring process done. This can be as simple as working with HR in your home country and traveling, or it could be as complicated as going through the expat system and how the company supports you living overseas and what benefits they provide, and whether you're working for the local company or you are still working for the home company or a blend. I worked in a situation where it was a blend when I lived in Mexico, and I had part of my salary paid in the U.S., part of it paid in Mexico, part of it in local currency. We had to have an accounting company help me with my taxes because I paid taxes in both countries. So it can get a little bit complicated. So you need to spend the time and the effort to investigate what it is that your company is looking for and what you're looking for and how you want to go about getting it. Are there certain things that you should focus on your resume? Well, I think Megan covered that pretty well. In the past, when we were hiring people, we looked at that diversity of experience, just as she mentioned, and being able to be more broad-based and not just single focus on their experience. But one of the things too, out of somebody coming just out of school, is to have on your resume if you've studied abroad and how much time you've spent abroad, if you've done it in multiple countries. Have you done an internship in the field that you're work that you're looking at? Have you got personal background history that can help with that? Things as simple as having moved several times before, or having lived in the same location all your life, can just show different life experiences that can be applied to a position. So you have to really dig to look for those nuggets of information that'll make you stand out on your application.
Perfect. And then finally, we're going to go to Patricia.
Yeah, so I think Megan and Steve both touched on some very unique things to certainly understand. And I think what I'll share is just what my experience was, having come from, certainly living and working domestically and getting that first opportunity overseas. And so we have the support within John Deere and John Deere Financial of having a human resources group that had expertise in handling an expatriate process, and they also knew who to reach out to in those countries where people were going, to understand what the visa's requirements were we going to be paid in local currency, or could you be paid in the US? I mean, so there was lots of nuances, finding an apartment to live in, how much were we going to be paid as a stipend to live overseas. There were things such as hardship pay. If you were going to a very difficult country, there was a thing as a hardship pay that you got additional money for that. So we fortunately could leverage our HR area for these things and help with the expatriate process. For me, I was asked to take the role in December of 2010 and didn't get to Brazil until August of 2011. And what happened over the course of those next number of months were things such as getting the visa to be a resident. They had to verify that I was uniquely qualified to lead the bank and that I wasn't taking a position away from someone that could be a Brazilian. So there was a lot of information that I had to send: my personal tax returns, my parents, their names and maiden names, and all sorts of information, both my undergraduate and my graduate degrees, and my resume of my career at John Deere Financial. I mean, all those things had to go to the central bank in Brazil to actually be reviewed in order for them to affirm and confirm that I could lead the bank. So those are just, as you think about it, some nuances that are very unique, and they're very country unique. I mean, it's not, you can't just say, okay, that's what it's going to be like in Mexico, or that's what it's going to be like in Hungary. So those are the things that you learn as you go through this process. But I will say that we had experts in-house as well as we reached out to appropriate legal counsel in countries to ensure that we were following the processes in order for me to go to Brazil.
Excellent. Thank you. What do I need to know about working abroad that will help me be successful? So for this one, we're going to start with Stephen.
I think one of the biggest things is being open to change. We all have our preconceived ideas, and we've spoken quite a bit about that this morning, about our preconceived ideas of how something should be. And we move to a new market, we move abroad, and there's a whole different culture and different viewpoint of how things happen. And we have to be open to adapt and to accept that, to embrace that culture, and be open to work within that culture and the system of how things are done there, and not try and bring the might of how I do things to change everybody else. I think as a team leader, one of the best things that you can do, whether you're working in nationally or internationally, is to be able to support your team and to be able to adapt and work with their characteristics and their abilities and strengths and weaknesses. And certainly in an international market, that's even more.
Awesome. Patricia?
Yeah, I think I'll share, as Steve talks about adapting, I'll share a couple of aha moments speaking to that point. So we got there in August 2011, and this was New Year's that year. And all the Brazilians told us, you need to be in country for New Year's Eve. It's amazing. You just got to be here, for it. So we made the decision not to travel home and stayed in country. And so as New Year's Eve was approaching, I was asking my work colleagues, well, what do you guys do for New Year's Eve? Why is it, so amazing, So they're like, oh, we spend it with family, or we go to the beach, but it was, again, Brazil, as I mentioned, is a very family-oriented culture. So that also means they're private. And so I just didn't probe any further. I just thought, okay, well, myself and our son had traveled down to spend that break from college with us and another colleague from the US. And we decided we would do what we typically do New Year's Eve. You'd go to a restaurant and you'd stay up past midnight and have champagne or whatever and see you in the new year. So we walked from our apartment building down to where there's usually like 10 to 15 taxis in line, and there's 2. And one taxi backs up to pick us up in the intersection. And we tell them that we want to go to this street in Porto Alegre that had a lot of the restaurants there. And so that's the street we went to. And as we're driving down the street, it says fechado, 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 which means closed. All these restaurants are closed. They're closed because all the employees spend that time with their family, many of them going to the beaches for fireworks and celebrations. And so that was my first aha of checking my US expectations at the door and continuing to ask additional questions, because when you don't get the answer you're expecting, it's not that they wanting to deceive you, it's that they don't understand your culture per se either. So you have to continue to kind of peel that onion back to better understand what it is that you're seeking. So I just thought I'd share that a little bit of insight. And the other thing I will tell you is, you're not native, you're going to make mistakes, and you just need to learn from those mistakes and continue to learn. So adaptability is spot on.
Perfect. Thank you, Patricia. Megan, do you want to finish up this question?
Yeah, no, I agree with the panelists. They covered it very well. I guess my biggest thing is the open-minded thing is so, so critical. And I'll share one of my key mistakes that I made walking in the door as a people leader and scientist is I came from the US, it's okay to work 70, 80, 90-hour weeks, and we just always push it. And it was really hard for me to get over all of the breaks that were incorporated throughout the day. And there's an espresso machine, and there had to be an espresso break probably every 2 hours for a good 15 to 20 minutes. And right away, my managerial skills, I said, oh, we have to get to work. We're going to miss deadlines. We have to do this. But what it taught me to do is to jump in and join them and learn how to work smarter and not harder. And I was able to bring that skill set back to the US and challenge my teams today, even in Iowa, to work smarter, not harder, and to really embrace the work-life balance. And so my first mistake over there, just with the assumptions of how we work or how we're supposed to work in science, agriculture fields, and coming back and saying, you know, there's multiple ways to work and there's multiple ways to do this activity. Let's start embracing the work-life balance. So it made me a stronger leader from the gate. And I just said that's something I just want to highlight is open-minded, pivot, adaptable, embrace change. You got it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Megan. Those are the pre-programmed questions that we had. So this is the time in the seminar that we're going to open up any questions that we have from any of our viewers. And I do know that we have at least one or two questions in the chat. So we'll throw that to Alex Waters here in just a second. But having done these webinars throughout the summer and this academic year, we felt like it was important for people who are watching these to be able to kind of identify what are the key takeaways. So just a couple of things that have been mentioned throughout this webinar that we certainly think would be helpful for you to remember. Number one, familiarize yourself with the country's dynamics, from the culture, the customs, and the language to prepare for a successful experience. It takes time to build the skills needed to work internationally, so use other positions to build the foundational blocks for international opportunities. Living overseas requires a support system to handle salaries, taxes, employment, and residency visas. Learn about your company's expat system. And then, of course, all of those qualities of a successful international employee that we have been talking about throughout this time. Solution-centric, open mindset, adventurous, open to exploring, humility, resilience, flexibility, becoming comfortable, being uncomfortable, foreign language, leveraging those global connections to solve similar problems, and being a lifelong learner, just being intentionally curious about things at all times. As I said, I know that we have a couple of questions in the chat, so we're going to go ahead and start to cover those now. If you have a question, now is the time to go ahead and put that in the chat. But at this point, I'm going to bring in Alex Waters to go ahead and ask some of those questions that we had in the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Stacy. Some great content and great takeaways, certainly. One of the questions that popped up a little earlier on, but I want to circle back to, was from Tatiana. And Tatiana asked, I find that unless you receive an overseas assignment from your employer, which some of you had talked about, that it's extremely difficult to be hired overseas because you have to have employment authorization for that country. Do you have any tips of how best to overcome some of those obstacles specifically? And I would open that up to anyone on the panel that maybe wants to offer any insight.
Yeah, so this is Patricia, and I guess in having kind of covered that a little bit in the one question that we had, I was fortunate enough not to have to navigate that myself. Again, we had our human resources group who answered and really knew the touch points, not only in the country I was going to, but also reached out to the appropriate legal counsel to get the needed paperwork. And so that was handled within the expatriate system within John Deere. I did not have to go out and do those things myself. And, you know, as I mentioned, it's amazing the amount of information they actually do require that you send in order to complete some of that paperwork. Because again, like I said, I had to prove that I was uniquely qualified to be the president for the bank. So again, that's kind of how it happened for me. I worked through the local HR unit for John Deere.
Just clear, I just wanted to say, I think one of the things that's important is that if you are looking for an opportunity to have exposure and experience to travel, work abroad or outside the country, I think it's important to research that company before you join and understand what are the opportunities. Sometimes you have to look before you leave. Those opportunities can be broken into a position that probably will give you exposure to working with people that are abroad with some direct line or dotted line responsibility. Those opportunities may have a chance where you have an expatriate opportunity. The position may be where you have a chance to eventually manage as you progress in your career, however, stay here where you are, wherever that particular company is located, and then manage in in the country where you reside, but also have responsibility where you would travel. But I think that is something that you would want to understand first, because working abroad, living abroad, and traveling abroad is not for everybody. And so I think you have to really dissect exactly what is it that I'm seeking, specifically when I want to work abroad, and what does that mean, and define those terms and requirements.
Perfect. Alex,
Yeah.
go for it.
Yep, I appreciate that insight, certainly. And I think the point was made earlier, maybe it was by Megan, to the importance of not only networking within your company, but also reaching out to establish mentors. Maybe it's LinkedIn, maybe it's Instagram profiles or friends, and just reaching out to those individuals, because you never know where those contacts could lead. I think those are valuable insights. Then there was another question Cleo posed, actually, that I really appreciate. And again, it's somewhat been touched on, but I wanted to throw it back to the panel one last time. What was one mistake you made early in working abroad that provided you with a greater learning opportunity that helped you later in your career? I loved the individual story about the celebration and community traditions, or traditions in country, but would just open it up if there were any specific other mistakes maybe that you learned from.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm just going to add a funny example just to show that we're human, and humility for this one. For agriculture, there's a lot of different sales meetings that go on at a location. And again, I ran a site of scientists and amazing commercial and research individuals. And one of the first mistakes I made, that most won't think it's a mistake, but Palinka, it's a fruit brandy. And before every meeting, it's custom to sit down and shake your glass and go da da ha, and then drink back Palinka during the workday. And I didn't do that, so I actually I didn't gain trust right away with some of the individuals and local farmers, and so I learned right away to dive into even new culture experiences that obviously fall within my beliefs and what I believe in my foundation, but to be open to adventure and to dive in, trying something new. And then my other one that I mentioned on earlier today is not assuming the way that we work is the way that everybody works was really critical, and it's helping me be a better global leader today, recognizing all the differences I have within the 12 countries that I interact with on a daily basis. And whether that's setting up meetings to time zones and being mindful that New Zealand is a way different time zone than it is over in Iowa. And it helped me with awareness. It helped me be aware that all hands matter, and all hands may be involved in those meetings and decisions, and to set up maybe some night meetings with some morning meetings, just to say thank you and to say that we're in it together.
I think one of the experiences that I went through was also, again, going back to not understanding or not realizing the culture that I was working in, what the needs were in the market that I was in. The example that I can give you is we were selling a certain horsepower range of tractors in Mexico as I worked with Case Mexico. And in that tractor line, we offered both those tractor models, both with an open station cab or with no glass and air conditioning, or a completely enclosed cab with glass and air conditioning and a better operator environment. Well, the take rate in Mexico was very high on the open station cab. And as we went forward, our manufacturing in the U.S. and for the North American market, it was predominantly cab tractors and very few take rates on the open station or open cab model. So the company decided to close out the open cab model. And I began to import just enclosed cabs with glass. And all of a sudden, my customers weren't buying anymore. And we finally sold a few to one customer, and I went to see his operation and to talk to him. And he was actually in the process of taking all of the glass doors, the windshield, the back window, everything off of the tractor and disengaging the air conditioning. And I asked him, why would he go through all that work and effort if he already purchased it with the glass? And he said, well, that was the only way you offered it to me. He said, but I cannot use it this way. He says, my operators will fight over the one tractor with air conditioning, and none of them will want to drive the other tractors, and their productivity will go down. So I quickly realized that we had made a big mistake for our market.
Yeah, I think similar to one of the things that I look back on, and I think I've reflected it in some of my comments as well, is just that, taking how you've been successful for me in the U.S. market, right? And whether it's working the amount of hours, as Megan mentioned, but for me, it was deadlines and how we approach deadlines. And so one of the things that was very common for us in the U.S. was the global performance management tool that we used every year. That in the U.S., even though the deadline was the end of October, we always had 30 to 45 days ahead of that, expected all of our employees to have their performance management comments entered into the system and step forward and so on and so forth. And so that we had ample time to do those reviews way ahead of the deadline. Well, as I approached my experience in Brazil, it was like, okay, well, we're going to follow the same pattern. We're going to make sure that we've got our global performance management tool updated and step forward to me. But that didn't work out that way. And what I really learned was a lot of cases we had arbitrary deadlines in the US. In Brazil, they got their things done and they got it done on the deadline. They were never late, but they were never early either. And some of that you just had to say, okay, that's okay. How we operate all over the world can be different and there can be different expectations. And so that really kind of, for me, heightened an awareness around, there are certain things that are arbitrary that you need to just say, okay, it's okay to have that be on the last day in the system for my colleagues in Brazil. So that was one of my mistakes, was just taking, again, my US expectations and applying it.
Definitely. Seems like a lot of those went right along with what we were talking about, being, flexible and adaptable, like understanding how things are working and how you can kind of change for success. Cleo, did you have something to add?
No, this guy, the group is doing very good. Let's keep it going. I love the engagement. I love the insights.
Perfect. We did put in the chat the survey link. This is the survey that we would ask you to fill out to help us with future kind of webinars and stuff. If there were any additional questions, you have just a couple of minutes to go ahead and put those in the chat. While we wait and see if there's any additional questions, Cleo, do you have any closing comments for us?
I think this is not just a fantastic opportunity for those who are aspiring towards positions in their careers or seeking to work abroad, or mid-career professionals that are looking to seek an experience overseas. There's no better opportunity than to participate in engagement panels just like today. What really rings loudly is culture, 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 culture. I've had the honor to work in, of course, and build strategies and execute campaigns in Japan, Australia, Europe, Brazil, Mexico, Canada, India. I can go on and on and on. But what I will tell you, the fact I'm talking about is the fact that one size does not fit all. To really understand as much as you possibly can about the culture. I think one of the things that I've learned in working abroad is that you have to separate the transactional from the relational. If you're seeking to achieve an objective, in some countries, when you're looking at business, relationships and how they build relationships matter. I can remember working over in Japan, spending a couple of weeks and coming up with a strategy that won the Grand Prix Award, which is the highest honor there. The fact that what was meaningful was not just the work, but what we did after work and building the relationships. I can remember working over in Germany. My goodness, I used to think some of the meals would take forever, but it was very important after work, the activities that really built the relationship toward to making sure that the transactions that you were trying to achieve were very, very critical. And so I just want to reiterate, culture means everything. It begins and it ends with culture. And of course, understanding that culture, no matter where you're going, is important. It's going to allow you to be successful. So I want to thank every one of the panelists today. You've been very, very informative, but more importantly, thanks for revealing behind the curtain some of the things that have worked and didn't work for you to share with everyone who's been listening today.
Absolutely. If I can kind of follow up on Cleo's points there, what wonderful advice from our experts. We want to thank all of our experts for volunteering their time and sharing their expertise with us and our students. But again, thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. Have a wonderful afternoon.